The bishop asked who would take this woman, and the woman was not me. I was sitting on the third bench from the back, in the dress I had sewn for my own wedding day, and I watched my younger sister stand up in my place. She walked to the front of my father's house. She stood where I was supposed to stand, and when the bishop spoke the words, she answered them. I was 79 years old that morning. No, I am wrong. Let me tell it true, because if I cannot tell it true now, then there was no point in living long enough to tell it at all. I was a girl. I was 20, and my sister was 18. And I sat very still on that bench, and I let it happen. I let her marry the man I was promised to. Nobody made me stay seated. That is the part I have carried for 59 years. Before I go any further, you should know who is talking to you. My name is Anna. I grew up old order Amish in a small church district, the kind of place where the nearest town was a day in the buggy and the world ended at the edge of the back field. This channel is Hannah the Amish girl, where I say the things my people spent their whole lives making sure stayed unsaid. I am old now. I have outlived nearly everyone in this story. And there is a freedom in that, a terrible freedom, because the dead cannot shun you, and the dead cannot ask you to stay quiet anymore. If you want to hear the truths we were never permitted to speak out loud, subscribe and tap the like button, and tell me in the comments, have you ever stayed silent when one word would have changed your whole life? I want to know. I read every one. Let me take you back, because to understand what I did, you have to understand the world that made it possible. In my district, a courtship was not a thing of feelings first. It was a thing of arrangement, of two families looking at two young people and seeing a future that made sense. The man I was promised to was named Jonas. He was 23, steady, with a quarter section of good bottom land that his father was ready to sign over. My father and his father had spoken across a fence in the fall, the way these things were spoken of then, and by winter it was understood. Anna and Jonas. The whole district knew it. I had my dress half sewn before the first snow. I want to be honest about Jonas, because the easy thing would be to make him cruel. He was not cruel. He was quiet and large, and he smelled of harness leather and wood smoke, and the few times we were permitted to sit together in the front room with my mother in the next chair, he spoke to me about the land, about where he would put the new barn, about how many milk cows the pasture could carry. He never once spoke to me about myself. And I never told him that the sound of his voice, kind as it was, made something in my chest go cold and quiet, like a pond freezing from the edges in. I did not have the words for that feeling then. We were not given words for our own insides. You were expected to feel what you were supposed to feel, and if you did not, that was your own sin to wrestle in the dark. My sister's name was Rebecca. She was 18, 2 years under me, and she was everything I was not. Where I was slow and careful, she was quick and bright and full of a kind of light that made the older women click their tongues and call her flighty. Rebecca laughed too loud at the singings. Rebecca looked too long at the boys. And Rebecca, I knew, had been looking too long at Jonas. I had seen it at the threshings, the way her eyes followed him across the yard. I had seen the color come up in her face when his name was spoken at the supper table. I told myself I was imagining it. A girl tells herself a great many things to keep from having to act. Here is what people outside my world never understand. We did not marry for ourselves. We married for the district, for the bloodline, for the unbroken handing down of land and faith and name. A wedding was not two people. It was two farms becoming one. And a girl who broke an arrangement, who stood up and said no, that I will not, did not just disappoint a man. She put a crack in the whole thing. She shamed two families. She made herself a story that the older women would tell for 40 years. To refuse was not just to refuse. It was to become a kind of stain. So when I began to understand in the long cold weeks before the wedding that I did not want to stand at that altar, I had nowhere to put the knowing. I could not say it to my mother, who had married my father the same arranged way and had made a life of not asking. I could not say it to Jonas. I certainly could not say it to the bishop. The feeling sat in me like a stone swallowed whole, and I went on sewing the dress, and I went on saying yes with my silence to a thing my whole body was saying no to. And then, 3 weeks before the wedding, Rebecca came to my bed in the dark. We shared a room, the two of us, the way sisters did. She climbed in beside me the way she had since we were small, and for a while she said nothing, and I could feel her heart going through the quilt. Then she whispered it. She told me she loved him. She told me she had loved him since the spring. She said his name like it was breaking her to say it, and she said she was sorry. She was so sorry. She would never speak of it again. She would carry it to her grave. Only she could not let me marry him without me knowing that her heart was going to be in the ground of that marriage forever. I lay there in the dark, and I want you to understand what I felt, because it was not anger. It was the strangest thing. It was relief. It was the pond cracking open, because I understood, lying there with my sister weeping quietly against my shoulder, that she was offering me a door, and I was the only one who could decide whether to walk through it. Nobody made me. Remember that. Through everything that comes, remember that nobody made me. I made me. What happened over the next 11 Sundays? I cannot carry it in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold. The names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I wrote it all down. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. The next morning, I went to my mother in the milkhouse while the pails were still warm, and I did the only brave thing I have ever done in my life. And even then I did it like a coward, sideways, not looking at her. I said that I did not think I was fit for Jonas. I said that Rebecca's heart was more suited to a marriage and a farm than mine was. I said that I thought I might be meant for something quieter, an aunt's life, a Maud's life, a life of helping in other people's houses. I did not say the word love. We did not own that word. But my mother looked at me for a long, long time across the cooling milk, and I understood that she understood, and that she had perhaps once stood in a milkhouse herself with the same stone in her throat, and swallowed it and married my father anyway. She said only one thing. She said, "If you do this, you must never speak a word against it after. You take this to your grave, Anna, and you let your sister have a clean wedding day." And I said yes. I gave my word in that milkhouse, and that word held my tongue for 59 years. It was decided among the women first, the way the real things always were, beneath the surface where the men never looked. My mother spoke to Rebecca. Rebecca spoke to the bishop's wife. The bishop's wife spoke to the bishop, and it was arranged quietly that the banns would be published not for Anna and Jonas, but for Rebecca and Jonas, and that no one would ever say aloud why the name had changed. In a world built on silence, this was a small silence, and the district swallowed it the way it swallowed everything. I do not know what Jonas was told. I have wondered every day of my life whether he was relieved, whether some part of him had been looking back at Rebecca across the yard, the same way she was looking at him, whether he ever knew that I sewed half a wedding dress for a marriage that was never mine. He was a good man, and he never once, in all the years after, looked at me with anything but kindness, and that kindness was its own kind of knife. The wedding was on a Thursday in November after the corn was in. It was held in my father's house, the very house where I had been the promised one, and I sat on the third bench from the back in the dress I had cut for myself and let out at the seams so it would not be recognized as a bride's dress. I watched my sister walk to the front. I watched her stand where I had been meant to stand. The bishop preached for 3 hours about the godly household, about the wife who yields and the husband who leads, and I sat with my hands folded in my lap and my face perfectly still, the way we were all trained to keep our faces still, and inside I was a house with every window lit and every door blown open. When the vows were spoken, I said them too, silently, behind my closed teeth, so that I would know what it felt like one time to marry him, even though no one would ever hear. And then it was done, and she was his wife, and I was the maiden aunt, 20 years old, with a whole long life of other people's kitchens ahead of me. I want to tell you that I felt peace. I did not for a long time. What I felt first was the cost, because in our world, the unmarried woman is not free. She is not a person who chose. She is a person who was not chosen. And that is how the district saw me, and that is how I let them see me, because the truth was mine to keep, and Rebecca's to never carry. I moved between households. I helped when the babies came. I helped when the dying went. I sewed and I canned, and I rocked other women's children to sleep. And at every wedding for 40 years, I sat on the back benches and watched. And the older women would lean to each other and murmur that poor Anna, something must have been wrong with her, that she never married. Rebecca and Jonas had 7 children. I helped birth every one. I want you to sit with that. The first time I held her firstborn, slick and screaming in the lamplight, I understood the full size of what I had given and what I had been given, both at once, and they were the same size exactly. That child had my eyes. People said so. That child had my eyes because Rebecca and I had the same eyes, our mother's eyes. But the women would say it and not know what they were saying. And I would smile and hand the baby back to its mother, who was my sister, who had married my husband with my blessing, in my place. Rebecca knew what I had done. We never spoke of it directly, not once in 59 years. But it lived between us like a third sister who sat at every table. There was a tenderness in how she treated me that the others took for guilt over my spinsterhood, and that I knew was something else entirely. She gave me the warmest chair. She saved me the heel of the bread, which I loved. When Jonas died, an old man in the winter, she came to me before she came to anyone, and she held my hands, and she said only, "He was good to me, Anna." And I said, "I know." And that was the whole of it. 2 old women and the truth between them, and not one word said plain. Now let me tell you what I learned, because if there is no learning in it, then it is only a sad story. And I did not live to be this old to leave you with a sad story. For most of my life, I believed I had been a coward in that milkhouse. I believed the brave thing would have been to stand up, to claim him, to take the life that was arranged for me and make the district's plan come true. That is what we were taught bravery was. Yielding to the arrangement, taking up your assigned place, carrying your duty without complaint. It took me until I was an old woman, and it took the quiet that comes after everyone who could shun you is gone, to understand the truth. I was not a coward in that milkhouse. The arrangement was not my life. It was a plan made over a fence by two men who never once asked either of us what we carried in our chests. The brave thing, the only brave thing I ever did, was to know my own no and let it be true, even though I had to dress it up as not being fit, even though I had to hand the word love to my sister because I was not allowed to own it myself. They told me my worth was in being chosen, and I chose. I chose to not be chosen. And in a world that gave women no choices at all, that was the one choice I smuggled out alive. I do not tell you this so you will think I was good. I was not especially good. I was frightened, and I was sideways, and I did the right thing for reasons I could barely name. I tell you this because somewhere out there is a person sitting very still on a bench, in a life that was arranged by people who never asked what you carry. And you think the brave thing is to stand up and take the place they cut out for you. I am 79 years old, and I am telling you, it is not. Sometimes the bravest thing a person ever does looks, from the outside, like sitting down and letting go. Sometimes the whole of your courage is one quiet no, said in a milkhouse, that no one will ever praise you for. If you grew up in a world where being chosen was the only worth a woman was allowed, I see you. If you ever let go of something everyone told you to hold, and carried the cost in silence so someone you loved could be happy, I see you, and I am telling you what no one told me. You were not weak. You were free, and you paid for it, and that is the most expensive freedom there is. The Sundays, what 20 minutes cannot hold. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. The morning is yours, if you decide it is.